The gunshot that split the evening air was not meant for Maeve Patterson, but it might as well have been, for it ended the life she had known in a single violent crack that echoed across the dusty streets of Hecla, Montana. She stood on the porch of her father's ranch house, her cloth bag clutched in trembling hands, watching as Silas Crenshaw fired his pistol into the sky one more time, his face twisted with rage at her refusal. It was the summer of 1873, and the heat rising from the parched earth seemed to shimmer with the fury of men who believed women were property to be bartered and sold. "You will regret this, girl," Silas snarled, his thick jowls quivering as he holstered his weapon. He was 42 years old, a cattle baron with a reputation for cruelty that stretched from Hecla to Virginia City. "No decent woman refuses a proposal from a man of my standing. Your father made a deal, and you have broken it." Maeve's father, Thomas Patterson, stood in the doorway behind her, his weathered face drawn tight with a mixture of shame and anger. "Get off my land, Maeve," he said, his voice cold as river ice. "You have brought disgrace upon this family. Silas offered you security, a future. You threw it back in his face like a spoiled child." "He beats his horses bloody," Maeve said, her voice shaking but firm. "He killed his last wife. Everyone knows it, even if the law would not touch him. I would rather die in the street than marry that man." Her father's hand came up, and for a moment she thought he might strike her, but instead he pointed toward the road that led away from the ranch. "Then go die in the street. You are no daughter of mine. You have 1 hour to be gone from this property, or I will have the hands remove you myself." Silas laughed, a sound like gravel scraping across tin. "She will come crawling back, Tom. Give her a week of hunger and cold nights. She will beg me to take her then, and I will, but the terms will not be so generous." Maeve turned without another word and walked down the porch steps, her boots stirring up small clouds of dust with each step. She had 23 years of life behind her, most of it spent on this ranch, learning to ride and rope and work alongside the cowboys her father employed. She had no mother, lost to fever when Maeve was just 6 years old, and no siblings. The ranch hands had been her family as much as anyone, but she knew none of them would defy her father to help her now. The town of Hecla lay 3 miles down the rutted road, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the path of the Northern Pacific Railway that had reached Montana territory just 2 years prior. Maeve walked with the setting sun at her back, her shadow stretching long and thin before her. In her bag she carried 2 changes of clothes, a hairbrush her mother had owned, $17 she had saved from selling eggs to the general store, and a small tintype photograph of her mother holding her as an infant. The evening air was cooling rapidly, as it always did in Montana once the sun began its descent. By the time Maeve reached the outskirts of town, the first stars were appearing in the vast expanse of sky overhead. She had no plan beyond finding somewhere to sleep for the night, and then figuring out what came next. Perhaps she could find work as a cook or a seamstress. Perhaps she could save enough to take the train east, to somewhere her father's shame could not follow her. The saloon was lit up bright as she passed it, piano music spilling out into the street along with the rough laughter of men. She kept her eyes forward and her pace steady, knowing that a woman alone after dark drew attention she could not afford. The boarding house run by Mrs. Carmichael was her destination, a respectable establishment where she might find a room for a few nights while she sorted out her situation. But before she could reach it, 3 men stepped out from the alley beside the feed store. She recognized them immediately as Silas Crenshaw's ranch hands, hard men who did their boss's dirty work without question. The tallest one, a man called Garrett with a scar across his cheek, smiled at her in a way that made her stomach turn. "Miss Patterson," he said, touching the brim of his hat in mock courtesy. "Mr. Crenshaw sent us to fetch you back. He figures you have had time enough to reconsider." "I have not reconsidered, and I will not," Maeve said, trying to keep her voice level. "Please let me pass." Garrett's smile widened. "Now, that is not really an option, miss. Mr. Crenshaw wants you at his place tonight. He says if you are going to refuse him, you can do it to his face proper-like." She knew what that meant. She knew what would happen if she went with these men to Silas Crenshaw's ranch, miles outside of town where no one would hear her scream. Her hand tightened on her bag, and she took a step backward, preparing to run even though she knew she could not outrun 3 men on horseback. The lady said no. The voice came from behind her, low and calm and absolutely certain. Maeve turned to see a cowboy standing in the street, his thumbs hooked into his belt, his stance relaxed but ready. He was tall and lean, maybe 26 or 27 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that caught the lamplight from the saloon. He wore dusty trail clothes and a battered hat, and there was a Colt revolver strapped to his hip. Garrett's expression hardened. "This does not concern you, stranger. Move along." "I am making it concern me," the cowboy said. 3 against 1 is not much of a fair fight, and I have never been fond of men who push women around. So here is how this is going to work. You 3 are going to get back on your horses and ride on out of here, and the lady is going to go wherever she pleases. Nice and simple. The second man, shorter and stockier, spat into the dirt. "You know who you are messing with. Silas Crenshaw owns half this territory. He will have you strung up." "Maybe so," the cowboy said, "but that will not help you much tonight if you do not do as I say." There was a long moment of tension, the kind that could snap into violence with the slightest wrong move. Maeve held her breath, aware that the street had gone quiet, that people were watching from doorways and windows. Finally, Garrett held up his hand to his companions. "Fine," he said, "but you are making a mistake, both of you. Crenshaw does not forget." They turned and walked back toward their horses, mounted up and rode off into the darkness. The cowboy watched them go, not moving until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Then he turned to Maeve and touched his hat. "Name is Xander Kincaid," he said. "You all right, miss?" "Maeve Patterson," she managed, her heart still racing. "Thank you. They would have taken me if you had not stepped in." "Figured as much," Xander said. He studied her for a moment, and she had the sense that he was seeing more than she wanted to reveal. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a safe place to spend the night. The boarding house here is run by a good woman, Mrs. Carmichael. I am staying there myself while I look for work. I would be happy to walk you there, make sure those men do not come back." Maeve felt tears prick at her eyes, the first she had allowed herself since leaving her father's ranch. The kindness in this stranger's voice was almost more than she could bear after the hardness of the past few hours. "I would appreciate that very much, Mr. Kincaid." "Just Xander is fine," he said, offering her a small smile. "Come on. It is just up the street." They walked together in silence, and Maeve found herself glancing sideways at her rescuer. He had an honest face, she thought, strong-featured but not harsh, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. His hands were rough and calloused, working hands, and he moved with the easy grace of a man who spent most of his time on horseback. Mrs. Carmichael was a stout woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Maeve and seemed to understand the entire situation without needing explanation. "You will be in room 4, she said, handing over a key. "That is $2 for the week, paid in advance. Breakfast is at 7, dinner at 6. No men in your room, no drinking, no trouble." Maeve counted out the money from her small purse, watching her funds dwindle. Mrs. Carmichael softened slightly as she pocketed the coins. "You look worn through, girl. Get yourself some rest. Things will look better in the morning." Xander walked Maeve up the stairs to her room, carrying her bag for her despite her protests. At the door, he set it down and stepped back. "I am in room 7, just down the hall," he said. "If those men come back or if you need anything, you holler. I am a light sleeper." "Why are you helping me?" Maeve asked suddenly. "You do not know me. You could have just walked on by." Xander was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "My sister was about your age when she got into trouble back in Kansas," he said finally. "She needed help, and nobody would give it to her because they did not want to cross the man who was causing her grief. She died trying to solve the problem on her own. So I guess I help when I can, when I see someone who needs it. Figure maybe it balances things out somehow." "I am sorry about your sister," Maeve said softly. "Me too," Xander said. He touched his hat again and turned to go. "Good night, Miss Patterson." "Good night, Xander," she said. "And thank you." She went into her room and closed the door, leaning against it for a long moment before she could move. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that looked out onto the main street. She set her bag on the bed and walked to the window, looking out at the town below. Lights still burned in the saloon, and she could hear the faint strains of music. Somewhere out there, her father was probably drinking to wash away the shame of having a disobedient daughter. Somewhere else, Silas Crenshaw was plotting how to get his hands on her. But here, in this small room, she was safe for tonight. And tomorrow, somehow, she would figure out what came next. She slept poorly, waking several times to every creak and sound in the boarding house. When dawn light finally began to filter through the window, she gave up on sleep and washed her face in the basin, braiding her dark hair and changing into a clean dress. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a pale, tired face, but her eyes were determined. She would not give up. She would not let Silas Crenshaw or her father break her. The dining room was already filling with boarders when she came downstairs. Mrs. Carmichael was serving eggs and bacon, fresh bread and coffee, and the smell made Maeve realize how hungry she was. She had not eaten since noon the previous day. She found a seat at the long table and accepted a plate gratefully. Xander came in a few minutes later, his hair still damp from washing. He spotted her and came to sit across from her, nodding a greeting. "Morning, you sleep all right?" "Well enough," she lied. "How about you?" "Like a stone," he said, loading his plate with food. "I rode in from Wyoming 3 days ago, still catching up on rest. What brings you to Hecla?" Maeve asked, grateful for the distraction of conversation. "Work, mostly," Xander said. "I have been drifting since I left Kansas 5 years back. I worked ranches in Colorado and Wyoming, did some guide work in the Dakotas. Heard there were outfits hiring up here in Montana. Figured I would try my luck. Have you found anything?" "Got a few prospects," he said. "Meeting with a rancher named Holloway this afternoon. He is looking for men who know cattle. I spent the last 2 years on a big spread outside Cheyenne, so I have got the experience." Maeve pushed her eggs around her plate. "I need to find work too. I cannot afford to stay at the boarding house more than a week on what I have saved." Xander looked at her seriously. "What happened yesterday with those men? That about your family?" She nodded slowly and found herself telling him the whole story. About Silas Crenshaw's proposal, about her father's arrangement, about being cast out when she refused. Xander listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker as she spoke. "Your father had no right to do that," he said when she finished. "And Crenshaw sounds like the worst kind of man. You were right to refuse him." "Right or not, it leaves me in a difficult position," Maeve said. "I have no family, no references for work. In a town this small, Everyone will have heard what happened by now. My father will have made sure his version of the story got around. Then maybe you need to not stay in this town, Xander said thoughtfully. Montana territory is big. Lots of places a person could go start fresh. On $17, Maeve said, trying to smile, I would not get far. Xander was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee. Then he looked up at her, his eyes serious. I've got an idea, but you are going to think I am crazy. Tell me anyway. Marry me, he said. Maeve stared at him, certain she had misheard. What? Hear me out, Xander said, leaning forward. It would not be a real marriage, not at first anyway, just a legal one. But if you were my wife, Crenshaw could not touch you. Your father would have no say over you. You would be protected, and you could come with me wherever I find work. Ranch wives work just as hard as the men, cooking and keeping house and sometimes helping with the cattle. You would earn your keep, and you would be safe. You cannot be serious, Maeve said. You do not even know me. Why would you tie yourself to a stranger like that? I know you stood up to a powerful man when it would have been easier to give in, Xander said. I know you have got courage and principles. That is more than I can say for most people, and I am not talking about tying myself to you forever. If you find you cannot stand me, or if you meet someone else, we can get the marriage dissolved. But for now, it would solve both our problems. You need protection and a way to support yourself. I need to look like a settled man if I want to get hired for the better jobs. Ranchers trust married men more than drifters. Maeve's mind was spinning. It was insane. She had known this man for less than 12 hours, but as she thought about it, she realized it also made a strange kind of sense. She had no other options that she could see. She could not stay in Hecla, and she could not travel alone. Even if she made it to another town, she would face the same problems finding work and housing as a single woman with no references. I would want to contribute, she said slowly. I would not be a burden. I can cook and clean, and I know ranching. I grew up on my father's spread. That is settled then, Xander said. We split everything even, partners. I do not understand why you would do this for me, Maeve said, searching his face for deception or ulterior motives. What do you really want from this? Xander met her eyes steadily. Honestly, I am tired of being alone. I am tired of bunkhouses and temporary work. I am 27 years old, and I would like to build something that lasts. Maybe this is not the way most people do it, but most people do not find themselves in the situations we are in. I think we could make a good team, Maeve. But if you do not want to do it, I will understand. I will help you figure something else out. Maeve thought about Silas Crenshaw's cruel smile, about her father's cold dismissal, about the long, uncertain road ahead if she tried to face it alone. She thought about Xander stepping in front of 3 armed men to protect her, about the gentleness in his voice when he spoke of his sister. It was a risk, but what choice did she have that was not also a risk? All right, she said. Let us do it, but I want your word that if I ask you to end the arrangement, you will do it. I will not trade one prison for another. Xander held out his hand across the table. You have got my word, Maeve Patterson. I will never force you to stay if you want to go. She shook his hand, feeling the rough warmth of his palm against hers, and tried to convince herself she was not making a terrible mistake. They were married that afternoon by the justice of the peace, a wizened old man named Tucker who asked no questions beyond the legal necessities. Mrs. Carmichael and her husband stood as witnesses, the older woman giving Maeve a knowing look that suggested she understood exactly what kind of arrangement this was. The whole thing took less than 15 minutes. Maeve signed her name on the marriage certificate in careful script, watching as Xander signed below her, and just like that, she became Maeve Kincaid. You will want to register this with the county clerk, Justice Tucker said, handing them the document. Congratulations to you both. Out on the street, Maeve looked down at the paper in her hands, feeling oddly detached from what had just happened. She was married. To a man she had met yesterday, it seemed impossible, and yet here was the proof in black and white. "I've got my meeting with Holloway in an hour," Xander said. "You want to come along? Might be good for him to see I've got a wife." "I suppose I should start earning my partnership," Maeve said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. They walked to the edge of town where Xander had stabled his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Copper. He saddled up and helped Maeve mount behind him, and they rode out toward the Holloway Ranch, which lay about 5 miles north of Hecla. Maeve wrapped her arms around Xander's waist, feeling the solid warmth of him, aware of how strange this all was. Yesterday she had been the daughter of a prominent rancher, with a home and a place in the world, even if that place had been suffocating. Today she was the wife of a drifting cowboy, riding toward an uncertain future. The Holloway spread was impressive, with good grazing land stretching toward the mountains and a well-maintained house and outbuildings. James Holloway was a man in his 50s with graying hair and a firm handshake. His wife, Eleanor, was a pleasant woman who invited Maeve into the house for coffee while the men talked business. "Xander seems like a good man," Eleanor said as she poured coffee from a china pot. "How long have you two been married?" "Not long," Maeve said carefully. "It was rather sudden." Eleanor smiled. "The best things often are. James and I knew each other only 3 weeks before we married. That was 30 years ago, and I have never regretted it. Do you know ranching?" "I grew up on one," Maeve said. "My father has a spread near here." "I know cattle and horses, and I can work as hard as anyone." "Good," Eleanor said. "We need people who are not afraid of work. James has been wanting to expand the operation, but we are short-handed. If Xander is half as good as his credentials suggest, and if you are willing to help out, I think we can make this work." They talked for another half-hour about the ranch, about life in Montana Territory, about the harsh winters and brief summers. Maeve found herself liking Eleanor, appreciating the older woman's straightforward manner. When the men came back in, both were smiling. "We have got a deal," Xander said. "Mr. Holloway is hiring me on as a senior hand, 40 a month plus room and board for both of us. There is a cabin on the property we can use. If things go well, there is the possibility of a foreman position next year." "Eleanor tells me you know ranching," James Holloway said to Maeve. "That is good. My wife could use the help, and there is always work to be done. We will pay you separate from Xander's wages, 20 a month for working in the house and helping with the vegetable garden and chickens." "Fair, more than fair," Maeve said, feeling a weight lift from her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Holloway. Call me James," he said. "You can move into the cabin today if you like. It needs a bit of cleaning, but it is sound." They rode back to town in the late afternoon light, both of them quiet with their own thoughts. Finally, Xander said, "We did it. We have got a place to land." "We did," Maeve agreed. She felt strange, a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Everything had happened so fast. Just yesterday she had been refusing to marry Silas Crenshaw. Today she was married to Xander Kincaid and starting a new life on the Holloway Ranch. It felt like a dream, or maybe like someone else's life that she had stepped into. They collected their things from the boarding house and rode back to the Holloway spread before sunset. The cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it had a good stone fireplace, a table and chairs, and a bedstead in the back room. There was a layer of dust over everything, and the windows needed washing, but Maeve could see the potential. "I can sleep out here by the fire," Xander said, setting his saddlebags down. "You take the bedroom." "We should probably discuss the rules of this arrangement," Maeve said, feeling her face heat. I mean, we are married, but we are not really married, not in the way most people are." "I understand," Xander said. "I meant what I said before. This is a partnership, nothing more unless you want it to be. I will not push you for anything you are not ready to give." Maeve nodded, grateful for his straightforwardness. "Thank you, and Xander, thank you for everything. You saved my life in more ways than one." He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger. "We saved each other, I think. Now let us get some rest. We start work tomorrow." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that Maeve found comforting. She woke before dawn to make breakfast, then spent her mornings working with Alina in the main house or tending the garden. The afternoons she spent on washing, mending, or preserving food for the coming winter. Xander left at first light with the other ranch hands and often did not return until sunset, exhausted and covered in dust. They ate dinner together in their small cabin, talking about their days, learning each other's stories. Maeve learned that Xander had grown up outside Kansas City, the son of a farmer who had lost everything in the economic panic of 1857. He had left home at 18 to find work, sending money back when he could. His sister, Charlotte, had been the baby of the family, bright and sweet and full of dreams. When she fell pregnant by a local merchant who refused to marry her, she had tried to end the pregnancy herself and died from the attempt. Xander still carried the guilt of not being there to help her. Xander learned that Maeve's mother had been the daughter of a Scottish immigrant, that she had taught Maeve to read from the Bible and to love the vast Montana sky. That her father had been different before her mother died, warmer, quicker to laugh. That Maeve had once wanted to be a teacher, but her father had dismissed the idea as foolishness. That she loved horses more than almost anything, and that she had a gift for gentling even the most skittish animals. They became friends, tentatively at first, and then with growing ease. Xander made her laugh with stories of his travels, of narrow escapes and strange characters he had met on the trail. Maeve taught him to make proper biscuits and mend his shirts so they did not fall apart after a week's wear. On Sundays, their one day of rest, they explored the land around the ranch, riding out to see the mountains or following the creek that ran through Holloway property. 6 weeks after their hasty marriage, Maeve realized with a start that she had not thought about Silas Crenshaw or her father in days. She had been too busy, too content with her new life. It was an odd kind of freedom, being married to Xander. She had more independence than she had ever had in her father's house, making her own choices about how to spend her days, earning her own money. And Xander was easy to live with, thoughtful and patient, never demanding more than she was willing to give. But she also found herself noticing things about him that had nothing to do with their practical arrangement. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he handled the horses, the sound of his voice in the morning, rough with sleep. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, like he was trying to figure out a puzzle. It confused her, these feelings that were growing despite her best efforts to keep things simple. She had married him for protection and security, not for love. Love was dangerous. Love made you vulnerable. Love could be taken away and leave you broken, but her heart, it seemed, did not care about her careful reasoning. It was late October when everything changed. The first snow had dusted the mountains, and there was a bite in the morning air that promised winter was coming. Maeve was returning from the main house with a basket of eggs when she saw the horses tied in front of their cabin. Her blood went cold. She recognized those horses. They belonged to her father's ranch. She walked faster, her heart pounding, and pushed open the cabin door. Inside, her father stood facing Xander across the small room. Thomas Patterson looked older than she remembered, his face lined with anger and something else. Regret, maybe, though Maeve did not trust it. "Maeve," her father said, "I need to speak with you." "I have nothing to say to you," Maeve said, setting down her basket with hands that shook. "You cast me out. You chose Silas Crenshaw over your own daughter." "Crenshaw is dead," her father said bluntly. "Thrown from his horse 3 days ago, broke his neck, and I have been doing some thinking since you left. I made a mistake, girl. I want you to come home." Maeve stared at him. "Silas is dead, as a stone," her father confirmed. "There is no reason for you to hide out here anymore. Come home and we will forget this whole thing happened." "No," Maeve said. She felt Xander move to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "I am not hiding. I have a life here, a husband, work that I enjoy. I am not coming back." Her father's face darkened. "You are my daughter. You belong at the ranch." "I belonged there," Maeve said, her voice steady now, "until you threw me out for refusing to be sold to a man who would have destroyed me. You made your choice then, father. I have made mine now." Thomas Patterson looked at Xander. "You put her up to this. Maeve makes her own choices," Xander said calmly. "That is one of the things I admire about her." "I am offering her a home, security," Thomas said. "What can you give her? You are just a ranch hand." "He gives me respect," Maeve said. "He gives me a partnership. He has never once tried to force me to be something I am not. That is worth more than all the security in the world." Her father stood there for a long moment, and Maeve saw the exact instant when he accepted that she was not going to change her mind. His shoulders sagged slightly, and he looked suddenly old. "Your mother would not have wanted this," he said quietly. "My mother would have wanted me to be happy," Maeve replied. "I am happy here, father, more happy than I ever was at the ranch. I am sorry if that hurts you, but it is the truth." Thomas Patterson turned toward the door, then paused. "If you ever need anything," he said, not looking back, "you know where to find me." Then he was gone, the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Maeve stood frozen until she could no longer hear them, then she felt her knees start to give out. Xander caught her, his arms strong and steady, holding her up. "It is all right," he murmured. "You are all right. He is gone." Maeve found herself crying, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. All the fear and anger and hurt of the past months came pouring out. Xander just held her, not saying anything, letting her cry it out. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You do not have to apologize," Xander said. "That was a hell of a thing, facing him like that. You did good, Maeve. You held your ground." She looked up at him, at his kind face and worried eyes, and something shifted inside her. "Xander," she said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I do not want this to be pretend anymore," she said, her heart racing. "This marriage, this life we have built, I want it to be real. I want you if you will have me. Not because I need protection or security, but because somewhere along the way I fell in love with you and I cannot keep pretending I did not." Xander went very still. "Maeve," he said carefully, "are you sure? You do not owe me anything." "I did not do this expecting you to fall in love with me." "I know," she said, "but I did anyway, and if you do not feel the same way, I understand. We can keep things the way they are, but I could not let another day go by without being honest with you." Xander cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the last of her tears. "I have been in love with you since about the 3rd week we were married," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I just did not think I had the right to say anything. I did not want to push you, did not want you to feel trapped." "I do not feel trapped," Maeve whispered. "I feel free, freer than I have ever been." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Maeve kissed him back, feeling like she was finally home after a long journey. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. "So," Xander said, I guess we should probably move my bedroll into the actual bedroom, Maeve laughed, feeling light and giddy. I guess we should. That night, for the first time since their hasty marriage, they shared the bed as husband and wife in truth. Xander was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. Maeve gave herself to him without reservation, trusting him completely. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, talking in whispers about the future they would build together. The winter was hard, as Montana winters always were. Snow piled high around the cabin, and the temperature dropped so low that water froze solid in minutes. But inside their small home, Maeve and Xander were warm. They spent the long evenings by the fire, reading aloud from the few books they owned, playing cards, or just talking. Xander carved small wooden animals that Maeve arranged on the mantel. Maeve knitted socks and scarves, making sure they would be prepared for next winter. In early spring, James Holloway offered Xander the foreman position, as he had hinted he might. It came with better pay and more responsibility, and Xander accepted eagerly. He was good at managing men, firm but fair, and the ranch prospered under his leadership. Maeve continued working with Eleanor, but now she also helped with the ranch accounts, her neat handwriting and head for figures proving invaluable. That summer, Maeve discovered she was pregnant. She told Xander one evening after dinner, watching his face carefully for his reaction. His eyes went wide, then he let out a whoop of joy and lifted her off her feet, spinning her around until she was laughing and dizzy. "Careful," she protested. "Put me down, you are going to make me sick." He set her down gently, his hands on her waist, his face alight with happiness. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Maeve asked, even though she could see that he was. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Xander said. He knelt down and kissed her belly through her dress. "Hello in there, little one. This is your father. I cannot wait to meet you." Maeve ran her fingers through his hair, overwhelmed with love for this man who had given her everything she needed when she had nothing. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Xander replied, standing and pulling her close. "Both of you." The baby was born in February of 1875, during a blizzard that shut down the ranch for 3 days. Eleanor Holloway served as midwife, her calm competence guiding Maeve through the long hours of labor. When it was over and Maeve held her son in her arms for the first time, she wept with relief and joy. "He is perfect," Xander said, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Look at him, Maeve. We made him." They named him Samuel Thomas, Samuel for Xander's father, Thomas as an olive branch to Maeve's father. She had not seen Thomas Patterson since that day he came to the cabin, but Eleanor had mentioned that he had asked after her, that he seemed genuinely remorseful for what had happened. Maeve was not ready to forgive him entirely, but she could extend this small gesture. Samuel was an easy baby, content to be passed from person to person, smiling at everyone he met. Xander was a devoted father, rocking his son to sleep, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that made Maeve smile. She watched them together and felt her heart could not possibly hold any more love, and then it would expand to accommodate even more. When Samuel was 6 months old, Maeve's father came to visit. He stood on the porch of their cabin, hat in hand, looking nervous in a way Maeve had never seen him. "I heard you had a baby," he said. "I was hoping I could meet my grandson." Maeve looked at Xander, who nodded. She had told him weeks ago that she was considering reaching out to her father, that she thought Samuel deserved to know his grandfather. They had talked about it at length, about forgiveness and second chances. "Come in," Maeve said. Thomas Patterson held his grandson with trembling hands, tears streaming down his weathered face. "He looks like you did," he told Maeve. When you were a baby, same eyes. Thank you for coming, Maeve said quietly. It means a lot. I have been a fool, her father said. I let money and pride matter more than my own daughter. I cannot take back what I did, but I hope someday you can forgive me. I am working on it, Maeve said honestly. It will take time, but I think we can find our way back to each other. For Samuel's sake, if nothing else. It was a beginning, tentative and fragile, but a beginning nonetheless. Thomas visited once a month after that, bringing gifts for the baby, sitting awkwardly in the cabin making small talk. Slowly, painfully, he and Maeve started to rebuild their relationship. It would never be what it had been before, but it became something new, something perhaps more honest. The years passed in a blur of hard work and quiet happiness. The Holloway Ranch thrived, and Xander's reputation as a skilled foreman spread. Other ranchers tried to lure him away with promises of more money, but he and Maeve were content where they were. They had a home, work they enjoyed, and a family they loved. Samuel grew into a sturdy, bright child, equally comfortable on a horse as he was with a book. He had his father's kind heart and his mother's determination. When he was 3, Maeve gave birth to a daughter they named Charlotte, after Xander's lost sister. And 2 years after that, another boy, David, completed their family. The cabin that had once seemed adequate grew cramped with 3 children, so Xander and some of the other hands built an addition, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper parlor. Maeve planted roses by the front door and put up curtains in every window. It became a real home, filled with laughter and life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander took Maeve on a picnic up into the hills overlooking the ranch. They sat on a blanket, eating cold chicken and fresh bread, watching their children play in the meadow below with one of the ranch dogs. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked. "Marrying me that day, taking such a crazy risk." Maeve looked at him, at the man who had saved her life in more ways than she could count. His hair was starting to show threads of silver now, and there were permanent laugh lines around his eyes. He was more handsome to her now than he had been at 27, because now she knew every part of him, inside and out. "Not for a single second," she said. "Best decision I ever made. Even though I was basically a stranger. Especially because you were a stranger," Maeve said. "You did not know me, but you helped me anyway. You gave me a choice when everyone else was trying to take my choices away. You showed me what it meant to be truly loved, not for what I could give you or how I could benefit you, but just for who I was. How could I regret that?" Xander kissed her, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that still made her heart race even after 10 years. "I love you, Maeve Kincaid." "I love you too, Xander Kincaid." They stayed up on the hill until sunset, watching the sky turn gold and orange and purple over the Montana landscape. Their children's laughter drifted up to them on the wind, mixing with the sounds of cattle and birds and the rustle of grass. Maeve leaned against her husband's shoulder and thought about that terrified girl who had walked into Hecla with nothing but a cloth bag and $17. She had been so lost, so alone, so certain that her life was over, but it had not been an ending at all. It had been a beginning, the beginning of everything that mattered. Years later, when Samuel was grown with children of his own, he asked his mother to tell him the story of how she and his father met. They were sitting on the porch of the cabin, now much expanded and improved, watching the sunset just as Maeve and Xander had done so many times before. Xander was out checking on the new calves, moving a little slower now with age but still vigorous and capable. "Your father saved my life," Maeve said simply. "Not just from dangerous men, but from a future that would have destroyed my spirit. He offered me a choice when I had none, and then he spent every day after making sure I never regretted taking it." "You must have been so scared," Samuel said. walking away from everything you knew. Terrified, Maeve agreed, but also free for the first time in my life. And then I met your father, and I learned that the best kind of love is not the kind that traps you or controls you. It is the kind that gives you wings. Samuel smiled. He tells everyone that you are the smartest person he ever met, and that marrying you was the only truly brilliant thing he ever did in his life. Your father has always been generous with his compliments, Maeve said, but she felt warmth bloom in her chest. Even after all these years, Xander could still make her feel cherished with just a few words. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to appear. Somewhere in the house, Charlotte was playing the piano they had bought her for her 16th birthday, the notes drifting out through the open windows. David was in the barn, probably reading by lantern light, the way he always did when he was supposed to be finishing chores. Xander came up the path from the barn, spotted them on the porch, and changed direction to join them. He climbed the steps with a slight grunt and settled into the rocking chair beside Maeve, reaching over to take her hand. "Cattle are looking good," he said. "We should have a strong season this year." "We always do when you are in charge," Maeve said. "That is because I married smart," Xander replied, winking at Samuel. Samuel laughed and stood up. "I am going to go see if Charlotte needs help with that piano piece. She has been working on it all week." When they were alone, Xander turned to Maeve. "What were you two talking about the day we met?" Maeve said. "How you offered me a better choice." Xander squeezed her hand. "You gave me a better choice too, you know. Before you, I was just drifting. You gave me a reason to put down roots, to build something lasting." "We built it together," Maeve said. "Yes," Xander agreed. "We did." They rocked in silence, hands clasped, watching the stars emerge one by one above the Montana horizon. Inside the house, Charlotte's piano playing blended with the sound of David's laughter at something Samuel had said. The night air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of roses and grass and home. Maeve thought back to that desperate girl standing in the street in Hecla, facing down 3 men who meant her harm. She thought about the cowboy who had stepped in, calm and certain, offering protection without asking for anything in return. She thought about a hasty marriage and a partnership that became a friendship that became a love story that spanned decades. It had not been the life she had imagined for herself when she was young. It had been infinitely better. "What are you thinking about?" Xander asked softly. "How lucky I am," Maeve said. "How lucky we are." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Xander said. "We chose this. We chose each other over and over again every single day." "Then I choose you again today," Maeve said. "And I choose you," Xander replied. The stars wheeled overhead, and the night settled in around their little corner of Montana. Inside, their children laughed and played and lived their lives, safe and loved and free. And on the porch, 2 people who had found each other in the darkest moments sat together, hand in hand, grateful for every moment that had led them here. It had started with a refusal, with a girl who was brave enough to say no to a cruel man even when it cost her everything. It had continued with a cowboy who offered a better choice, who saw a person in need and helped without expecting reward. And it had become a love story that would be told for generations, about how sometimes the greatest love comes from the most unexpected places, and how the best choices are the ones we make when we have nothing left to lose and everything to gain. Maeve and Xander grew old together on that ranch in Montana, surrounded by children and grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. They worked until their bodies would not let them work anymore, and then they sat on that porch and watched the young people do the work, offering advice when asked and staying quiet when not. When Xander passed away in his sleep at the age of 79, Maeve held his hand and whispered her love to him one more time. She grieved deeply, but she also knew that she had been blessed with a love that most people never found. They had built a life together from nothing, had created a family and a home and a legacy of kindness and respect. Maeve lived another 5 years after Xander's death, cared for by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and witty, even as her body failed her. On the last day of her life, surrounded by family in the house she and Xander had built together, she smiled and closed her eyes, ready to find him again. The story of Maeve and Xander became family legend, told and retold at gatherings, embellished with each generation but never losing the core truth of it. That love is a choice made every day. That kindness matters, even to strangers. That sometimes the worst moment of your life is actually the doorway to your best one. And that a girl who was cast out for refusing to marry a cruel man and a cowboy who offered her a better choice could build something beautiful that would last long after they were gone.